I just got done with all of the really boring barn chores for the evening. Over the last couple of days, a lot of the snow has melted. I need to brush all of the horses and get the majority of this mud off if I can. Scarlett has been working all day on her little mud coating. Her mane is also really disgusting. I'm gonna wait a little while before I try and brush her because she still is actually wet. The majority of the round pen is now dry, and that is really exciting because Scarlett definitely has a lot of energy I'm gonna have to get out of her. She is in another growth spurt right now. I need to measure her, but she is definitely at least 14.2 currently. There is still just a little bit of water sitting in the round pen, and I need it to be 100% dry before I work up the sand. All of this was under ice yesterday. I am going to leave this old poop out for another day or two and wait until it's dry. It's just way easier to clean up, and that'll give me some extra time to groom all the horses tonight. Next week it is going to be all the way up into the 60s, and I think there's going to be a day or two where I'm going to be able to get all of the horses their first bath. I think it'll line up perfect for when their hair starts actually coming out. While I let Scarlett dry off a little bit, I am going to go check the gelding's pasture and see how that is draining. It has been kind of a weird day here today. It has been snowing, but the air is pretty warm, so it'll snow and then it actually melts before it even hits the ground. It is really weird. But you can still see it snowing on the mountain, so hopefully tomorrow there'll be some fresh snow up there. It looks like everything around has been running off pretty nicely. Typically when spring comes around, this dry lot takes maybe a week or more to melt off, and it's done it in 2 days this year. I've really been trying to keep up with it so it drains properly, and this side is actually really dry already. The mud is like not even sticky. There are a few places that are really muddy, so I can't get the four-wheeler in here yet. I also have a little bit of a stream running through my pasture today. All the runoff from the neighbor's field is coming right through the little pasture I have. If you watched my last video, it looked a little something like this, maybe I think it was 3 days ago, yeah. So we had a few really warm days. Unfortunately, this big ice chunk is preventing the water from running off where it usually does, so I'm going to take a few minutes and break it up, and hopefully it won't be draining into the boys' dry lot then. The ice doesn't feel super thick, so I think this will be pretty easy to break up. I am getting really excited to harrow the pasture and put some new seed down. I did find the same exact seed I usually get for the pasture on Amazon. I added it to my wish list, and it looks like a bunch of you guys already bought a few bags for me, so thank you so much. I've had a lot of people asking me to start a GoFundMe, but I really don't feel comfortable doing that. I really appreciate you guys just watching and sharing the videos. As I run out of the things that I use all the time for the horses, I just pop them up on the wish list, and you guys are welcome to take a look at it and help me out in that way if you would like to say thank you. But since I am not a 501c rescue, I just don't feel right taking donations. The horses are still gonna get excellent care, and I am going to keep chugging along until spring arrives, and hopefully I can get in some new horses to help. Typically in the spring, I make sure that all of the big chores are done before I make any obligations to new horses. One of the things I do before I go to my first auction is really think about if the horses are getting everything that they need. I have the dentist coming out at the end of the month. I just got a bunch of their vaccines in the mail that they'll be getting soon. And I'm waiting on the mud to dry up a little bit more before I put shoes on some of these guys. One of the other things that I need to figure out before spring is the whole situation with these two horses' fence. They have a temporary fence that keeps them in their dry lot. Well, it's supposed to keep them in their dry lot. Goose has become quite the jumping pony over the winter, and Whiplash has figured out how to short out the electricity to the fence. So I'm thinking a more permanent solution is in their future. Goose and Whiplash have been out with the other boys in the summertime, but during the wintertime it is way easier if they get to share their own shed. Goose is a lot like Pete. He is kind of a suspicious horse. I think the next video that I do this weekend is going to be on Goose, since he has such a similar story to Pete's. He is kind of a cool horse that I got actually from the same sale barn that Pete came from. I should probably do a video on Whiplash as well. He is one that I won't ever sell. He's 20 years old. He was a stallion until I bought him when he was 17, and he has kind of a hard time getting along with a large group of horses. He has a few stallion behaviors when he's out in a herd, and it just makes them being out in a small dry lot together a little bit difficult. It looks like Stewie is pestering all the other horses over there. They are getting pretty serious playing around today. That's Stewie and Little Gus. They have been locked in their dry lot since the snow has started to melt. So I think they're getting bored. I've pretty much given up on fixing this fence for these horses, so when they jump out, I just let them back in for their dinner. I'm gonna have to figure out something soon because they will ruin this whole pasture if they're out on it much longer. He didn't get too dirty today, just this one big crusty patch. He is a really sweet horse now that he is a gelding. Goose is a little bit suspicious of people as well. He didn't have quite the handling that Pete did, but he's generally just a very reactive horse. It looks like he is definitely ready to start shedding out his winter coat. I'll have to check his paper, but I'm pretty sure he's 10 years old this year. He also still has a very immature mind, just like Pete. He acts more like a 2 or 3-year-old. It looks like Whiplash isn't quite ready to lose his winter hair yet. It looks like Stewie is pestering the other horses again. He is such a little turd. Today was the first day that all of the snow and ice was out of the arena. So just a few more days and I'll be able to drag it, and then these guys can get back into some work. Then hopefully they won't be up to so many shenanigans at feeding time. I'm really surprised that Skeletor and Stewie didn't really get along when they were turned out together. They both kind of pester the other horses to play, and none of them really like to play. So it's super weird that Stewie and Skeletor didn't just buddy up. I better go feed them so they don't get hurt, but first I'm gonna measure this fence line. I'm thinking that I might put in some more permanent T-posts, or maybe I'll just get some panels that I can move around. I would really like to have a place where I can turn Scarlet out this summer. I think this tiny pasture would be the perfect one to introduce her to, like a hot wire fence. She tried to run through and jump over the fence a lot when I very first got her.
Stewie?
So I am going to be very careful with her when I introduce her to like the regular horse fence. Since this dry lot melted off so fast this year, the mud on this side got much deeper than it usually does. It usually has quite a lot of time to drain off, but this year it just soaked into the ground, so the mud is pretty deep. I think these guys are wasting probably too much hay getting fed out here, so I'm gonna try and feed them on the other side of the dry lot today. I think little Gus is worried that I'm gonna forget to feed these guys. Tiny finally came down from the haystack to get some scratches today. I do love getting little surprise presents from you guys in the mail. I have a feeling this was for Skeletor and maybe supposed to be much larger. I've gotten bamboozled on Amazon before, and I think that may have been what happened here. I wasn't expecting the horses to be so excited about the squeaky noise. Nigel had no idea what to make of it, and Frisco Bill was actually pretty scared of it too. For being so old, he is afraid of a lot of things still. He is a cutting bred horse, so he notices every little thing anyway. I do think I found the perfect solution for this little guy though. With the gophers coming out, I think it's probably time. Tiny got some training in. I've seen her trying to pounce on the gophers, but she seems like she's not quite quick enough yet. Sometimes it's really nice that I have this whole barn to myself so I can do things like tie a tiny rubber chicken up to a piece of baling twine and play with my cat. I think Tiny was really having a good time. She does have some crazy mousing moves. Tiny is a pretty easy cat to please with her toys. She could stay busy for hours with just a plain piece of baling twine. After a while, I'd figured that I probably really should go feed the horses so they don't get out of control. Frisco Bill was also having a pretty hard time with it. I bet Skeletor would have played with this, but it is awful small and I was worried that he might choke on it. I'm gonna have to go on the outside of the perimeter fence to get these guys their hay on the other side of their dry lot. A lot of you have asked me if I live on the same property as the horses, and I actually live on the other side of this giant pasture. So I don't live on the property, but I can see it from my house. It is just so much easier to drive over. In the winter, it's pretty cold, and just in case one of the horses needs to be taken somewhere in a hurry, it's nice to have the truck over here with me. I have no idea how long this guy has been out here. I also have to do a video on little Gus and big Gus back there. I don't have any plans to sell those guys anytime soon. Little Gus has some behavioral problems, and big Gus is a pretty reliable guy, so I like to keep at least one of those around. He has a few little quirks that I think would get a beginner in trouble. I fed the rest of the horses their dinner. Here is Studman. There's Prim chowing down. And of course, even though I just cleaned Skeletor's stall, he managed to squeeze out 3 piles of poop. And Frisco Bill, he's been getting to eat a lot more regular hay. One of the bales that I opened was really fine stemmed, and he has been cleaning it up. He has really been enjoying this warm weather because he can finally have his blanket off all the time. I am gonna grab a few handfuls of treats before I go out into the pasture and brush these guys before I go home. None of them were horrible except Scarlet, of course. Since it is going to be really close to freezing tonight, it is nice to get the mud out of their coats so they can fluff up normally and keep them warm. I have been getting Scarlett in the routine of me brushing her while she's eating her dinner. I think it's important for these horses to let me walk up to them and pet them or brush them whenever I want, even if they're busy eating. If you guys have watched Scarlett's beginning training videos, it is kind of wild to think how she was last year compared to this year. At this time last year, I still hadn't really brushed her at all. She had big giant clumps of mud and hair falling off of her that were driving me crazy. Even though I really haven't done any actual training with her this winter, she has been in some sort of routine, me just brushing her and picking out her feet. She's had a few hoof trims over winter. Her feet are a little bit long right now, and I'm waiting for my new nippers to come in before I trim her feet because hers are really, really hard. Since her feet are so hard, it's not a huge deal if she goes over her trim cycle a little bit. She has really good conformation, so I don't really need to balance her feet very much. I don't really understand how she gets so disgusting every single day. Just today, she has started to lose a lot of her winter hair too, which is pretty disgusting when it's not muddy, but when there are actual chunks of her own poop stuck in her hair, it is pretty disgusting. I was pretty surprised she didn't squirm around while I was brushing her flank. That can be a really ticklish spot for a lot of horses, especially young horses or very sensitive horses with a high flight response like Scarlett. But she did really, really well today. I did notice when I was brushing her that her shape is kind of changing a little bit. She has always had a more prominent wither, and she's filling out so much now that she's getting quite round. I am going to be really interested to see if they pull any more horses off the same rangeland that she came from. I honestly don't typically buy horses like Scarlett because they are a little bit tricky to train and then difficult to rehome. But now that I know how she grew up and how good minded she is turning out to be, I'm going to have a hard time saying no if I see some of her brothers and sisters come through the sales this summer. It looks like Tiny got all jazzed up from her training session and she's being quite sassy. She does have a little bit of a mouse belly, so I think she went right over and caught a few mice afterwards. She usually always follows me around when I brush the horses in the evening. I think she likes to have an escort, especially this time of year when the coyotes are coming out and the bald eagles are around. These horses didn't look too terrible. I think since their pen is getting pretty dry when they roll, they don't have to lay right down in the mud. These boys are getting pretty round this time of year, so it's not likely that they'll get cold just from having a little bit of mud on them. But since this is literal poop mud, they do have a higher risk of getting different types of fungus this time of year. So it's better if I can get this mud off right away so it's not sitting on their skin. Usually the first bath that I give them will be an antifungal bath just in case they've got anything nasty lurking in their coat. It is a huge pain if you go to start riding in the springtime and they're all covered in fungus. It looked like Pete was not really interested in getting brushed this evening. He didn't seem interested in my treats either. Since it is extra muddy this year, I might bring some hay feeders out here for these guys. They are basically just big water tubs with holes drilled in the bottom so they don't get moldy. Stewie actually looks pretty clean today compared to how he looked the last couple days. He is not losing too much of his hair yet either. Stewie is one that is always interested in treats. I probably should actually not be giving him so many treats. He would do exactly as I asked, just for scratches. I am going to try and get a hold of Pete tonight if I can get Stewie to stop following me around. When I first got Pete, he could be really hard to catch when he was out with the other horses. Now he pretends that he doesn't want me to catch him, but I don't fall for his games anymore. It's pretty easy when everybody else is eating because I just stand next to the food. He'll trot away and hide, and when he realizes that I'm not going anywhere, he'll usually just give up. This is the whole amount of time it took me to get him to stand still today. If I had a halter in my hand, it probably would have taken me a little bit longer. But once he's stopped and facing me, he usually just stands still. I still give him a few treats when he decides he wants to be calm and hang out with me. This is still something that's really hard for him some days. Some of it is from his prior training, and some of it is just the kind of horse he is. A lot of you had mentioned some trainers in the comments of his videos, but this isn't an issue that's going to be trained out of him. I think sometimes you have to accept these horses for who they are and then build your training routine around that. And it's really not a huge deal. It takes me literally 5 extra minutes compared to the other horses. So it's not really something I'm trying to fix. That's just how Pete is. I brushed the mud chunks off of him, and then he was free to go back and eat his hay. This is the muddiest I've ever seen it in this dry lot this time of year. I think I will have to start feeding the horses on the other side. Hopefully just a few more days until it dries up completely. The dry spot that Goose and Whiplash have in their pen is actually not dry at all. It's still ice. So I'm probably going to have to start feeding them in their run-in shed for a dry spot here pretty soon. Whiplash just has this one big chunk of mud on him. It also looks like he's wearing half of his dinner. He is a very sweet horse. He also is quite mouthy. I think it's from him being a stud for so long. It has been really cool to see how Goose has learned a lot of things from Whiplash. Goose is not as standoffish as Pete, but he can be a little bit sensitive about being touched in some places. He is a registered quarter horse, and some of the horses in his pedigree have particular traits that seem to be passed down, and part of his general attitude is from those traits. Whiplash is also a registered quarter horse. He is actually related to Frisco Bill. Whiplash is a 3/4 brother to Frisco's daddy. They also have a lot of similar traits. I did one more tug test on Goose, and it does look like he is definitely ready to be shed out. I am excited to share with you guys what Goose was like when I very first got him. He is one of the harder horses that I've ever had to halter break. I am planning on having that video about Goose out on Saturday, so keep your eyeballs peeled for that one. When I was done grooming all of the horses, Tiny was ready to go back into the barn for the night. Even though it was pretty gloomy outside today, it did give me an extra boost of energy to see all of the snow melting and the horses starting to shed their winter hair. Thank you so much for watching, and stay tuned for the next video.